On today's episode of Locked On Wild, Bill Guerin says the 2025-2026 Minnesota Wild roster is in better shape than 2024-2025. He's right?
Hey, this is Matt Boldy, and you're listening to Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team each and every day. We thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day as well. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms as well, so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we take a look at whether or not the Minnesota Wild are currently better prepared for the three biggest areas of concern from last season. We'll talk about the injury situation and the roster depth. We'll talk about the special teams, and we'll talk about the secondary scoring as well, just to try to get a barometer of where things are at with the Minnesota Wild. My name is Seth Toupal, host of Locked On Wild, host of Seth on Sports, and a credentialed media member as well. And we got the soundbite after Nico Sturm signed with the Minnesota Wild, that Bill Guerin thought that this year's team is in better position than last year's team. He said, I think this team is better. I think we are better as a team than we were last year. And you may hear him say that and kind of look around and say, really? Because, there weren't massive moves made by the Minnesota Wild this offseason. There were a couple of secondary moves made. The team, it looks like, is going to have Marco Rossi on the roster to start the season, which certainly makes a big difference. But I think there are ways that this team can match or do better this upcoming season. In a couple of key areas. Let's start with maybe the biggest spot, the health, because the Wild spent all of last season, and you got 41 games out of Kirill Kaprizov. You got 41 games out of Joel Eriksson-Ek. You got in the 60s as far as games go for Jonas Brodin, for Jared Spurgeon, for Jake Middleton, for Matt Zuccarello. On and on and on and on and on and on. Just there were three players that played a total of 82 games. It was Marco Rossi, it was Matt Boldy, and it was Freddie Gaudreau. Zach Bogosian played in 81, but beyond that, it was a very tiny list of players that could boast that they had full health throughout the course of the season. So theoretically, if players can avoid those same types of injury issues, the team should be better this season than they were last year. If I had to bet between the two, is Kirill Kaprizov going to play more than 41 games? I feel like that's a pretty safe bet to take. Now, I'm not going to necessarily go all the way up to a full 82-game season, but if Kirill can get even into the 70s as far as games played go, that's 30 more games with a guy who was playing at a Hart Trophy level last season. That makes a big difference. The Minnesota Wild were 20, 17, and 4 without Kirill Kaprizov last year. So everydayers know how I feel about the overtime loss. It's a loss that takes longer. It still counts as a loss. So the Wild were 20 and 21 without Kirill Kaprizov in the lineup last season. And that honestly is better than I expected the number to be. You just don't see a lot of teams that can tread water with a player like that out of the lineup. So if Kirill can get to somewhere around 70 games played, that's going to make a massive difference this year. Joel Eriksson Ek is the same thing. I feel pretty confident that he's going to play over 41 games this year. But just with his style of play, can't really say that I expect to see him in 75, 80 games. I think if he can get somewhere around 65 to 70 games, I think that is what you call a big win. And knowing what we know, that he was dealing with a core issue that robbed a lot of the offense from his game, it's reasonable to expect a bounce back season from Joel Eriksson Ek next year as far as the offense goes, which again helps the team. And there's a lot of concern for individual players from an injury standpoint. You know, every year that we get into the tenures of Jared Spurgeon and Jonas Brodin, it seems like they get closer to the 60s as far as games played, as instead of in the 70s and the 80s, which is a concern. The play is still there, but the games played is starting to dip into a level where you're having to try to figure out how to fill those spots 15 to 20 games a season. As far as injury fill-ins go this year, I feel like the Wild are better equipped to handle injuries to the lineup for one main reason. Number one, we're not going into the season with under $1 million in cap space. So obviously a portion of that will be taken up, you'd expect, by a Marco Rossi contract that is going to be signed at some point this offseason. So you're not going to have $10 million to play with, but you could have 4 or 5, and that still allows you the roster flexibility to be able to make moves, which is something we have not seen from the Minnesota Wild over the last couple of seasons. The penny pinching was done to almost an astronomical level, to where in order to be cap compliant, you are fielding a roster of 22 or 21. The Wild do not have to do that this year, which means we already know defensively the Wild will be behind the 8 ball a little bit to start the season, with Jonas Brodin having had surgery. And got a little clarification on the Brodin situation. From the sounds of it, it was an issue that did not pop up until a practice. He got through a practice for Worlds, and it just didn't go. The practice didn't go well, and Brodin started to feel it. And then at that point, the determination was made, we better do something about this. So it wasn't something that they knowingly went through most of the offseason without addressing. It was just something that there was a chance it could flare up, and it did. So he had to have the surgery, but that means he's going to miss the start of the season, which means that, you'll be having to try to fill that spot defensively. As it stands right now, the other 6 defensemen under contract for the Minnesota Wild include Brock Faber, Jared Spurgeon, Jake Middleton, Zach Bogosian, Zeev Buium, and David Jiricek. So those are probably going to be your starting 6 defensemen. But you've got Carson Lambos at the AHL level who could be brought up to either play or to be the 7th defenseman, a player who is knocking on the door of an opportunity to get to the NHL level. The Wild did also add a couple of depth defensive pieces that could come up and be your 7th defenseman. The Wild have the option of what they want to do. If they want to have Zach Bogosian be the 7th defenseman, they could have Carson Lambos slot into the lineup. If they want to have Zach Bogosian start at the beginning of the season, then they can bring somebody up to be that 7th defenseman. They don't have to count to the penny as to how that spot is going to be filled. Same thing on the offensive side. You brought in kind of veteran minor leaguer Nicholas Abe-Kubel, but you have players that you are hoping will take leaps this year to offset any sort of regression or lack of production by mainstays in the offensive side. We expect big things from Liam Ogren this year. We are expecting big things from Danila Yurov this year. You've got other players down on the farm that, depending on how far you have to dip into your system, you've got some players that can come in and can provide, I think, better depth than we saw last year with the likes of Devin Shore, Brendan Gaunce, Vinny Hinostroza expects to be in Iowa to start the year, but he is an option if you need somebody to come in and fill a roster spot low in the lineup. Tyler Pitlick is a guy that's been around for a while. So I think the plan this year, as far as handling injuries goes, is it looks to be giving these young players some opportunities to see if they can fill a spot. If you have a top 6 injury, that'd be a good opportunity to give Danila Yurov some time up there to make sure that he is ready to take one of those spots, or Liam Ogren to hop in and take one of those spots. And then if you need a body to fill lower in the lineup, then you go grab one of those AHL depth guys to slot in on the 4th line. So I feel like from a depth perspective, from an injury fill-in perspective, for both having the additional cap space and having some new bodies that can do a variety of things, I do feel like the Wild are a little better prepared. And you just have to hope, but this, I will say, this is the 3rd season in a row. So 3rd time's the charm, maybe. There have been a high level of injuries the last 2 seasons. Law of averages would suggest that can't happen for a 3rd. I'm not going to hold my breath, but if you have a little bit better injury luck, more cap space to deal with, and a few additional young players and or AHL guys that can fill in wherever you need them on the roster, you stand to be better prepared to handle injuries throughout the year. So in that aspect, from the injury standpoint, I feel like the Wild are better equipped this year. But the big one is going to be scoring. Are they going to be able to get significant production from line 2 to match what line 1 can consistently do? We will dive into that subject as we continue today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Today's episode of Locked On Wild is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever wish managing your money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all of your accounts, investments, and spending all in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're building wealth too. One of my favorite aspects of Monarch Money is the ability to see everything in one spot. I don't have to sift through credit card apps, financing apps, banking apps. It's all in one spot. And I get detailed breakdowns in each category so that I know where the money's going, what the money's doing, and most importantly of all, what I can be doing with the money that's just sitting there. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off your first year. Welcome back to today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Make sure to hit that like button on YouTube and subscribe so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Also, if you are a listener on the many audio platforms, We appreciate having you along. If you are so inclined, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or on Spotify. It helps with circulation of the show, and we certainly appreciate the feedback. Plan for the rest of the week, we are going to have Kevin Gorg on tomorrow to recap the moves for the offseason and kind of look ahead as to what we're expecting from this team right now and when we could get some clarity on the final few pieces of the offseason. So that's coming up tomorrow, and then next week we are going to move into report cards, player evals from the 2024-2025 season. Every player, every coach for the rest of July. And then in August, we are going to be going on a little Locked On NHL road trip, checking in with all the other hosts of the other Locked On NHL shows. So that's the plan. And then we get the 2025-2026 season started September 1st. So laying out the offseason for you so you know what to expect here going forward. And of course, if there's breaking news that happens, we'll jump into that plan and we'll make sure we got you covered. So let's talk about the offense, because it's one thing to say, well, in theory, the Minnesota Wild are better equipped to handle the injuries, and it does look like they are with the additional cap flexibility and with just the additional pieces that stand to hop up in the lineup and make more of an impact. The offense has been a point of contention for the Wild over the last couple of seasons. Outside of Kirill Kaprizov and a couple of the other regulars, you're just not getting consistent production up and down the lineup. But if the Wild are going to make that jump to join the likes of Dallas, join the likes of Colorado, of Winnipeg, of those teams at the top of the division and in the West as well, you've got to be able to attack with multiple lines. And so looking at the expected line combinations, we're going with what Daily Faceoff has right now. You could flip the centers here, but I'm not necessarily worried about the combinations. I'm worried about what the players in the top six represent. You've got Kirill Kaprizov, Joel Eriksson Ek, Matt Zuccarello, Matt Boldy, Marco Rossi, Vladimir Tarasenko as your top six right now. Subject to change, subject to injury, subject to player performance, but that's what we're going with for the purposes of this exercise. Because I'm going to look at the top six for the other teams that the Wild are trying to contend with, to try to get a baseline as to what you need from particular spots in the lineup. For the Avalanche, you've got Arturi Lehkonen, Nathan McKinnon, and Marty Necas was their top line, at least according to Daily Faceoff. That's 27, 31, and 27 goals across the board. You've got Gabriel Landeskog, Brock Nelson, and Valeri Nichushkin for line two. Landeskog did not play in the regular season last year. He was working his way back from injury. He got in the playoffs, but the expectation is that he'll be more of a returning force to the lineup come next year. But he is somebody who has been a 25 to 30 goal scorer throughout his career. Brock Nelson had 26 goals. Valeri Nichushkin had 21. So your top line, at least according to the Avs, your top line's got to feature guys that are 30-goal threats. And your second line should feature players that are capable of giving you 20. For Dallas, Jason Robertson had 35 goals. Rupe Hintz had 28. Mikko Rantanen had 32. Matt Duchene had 30. Wyatt Johnston had 33. Tyler Seguin, who missed part of the year with injury, he had 9. But Seguin is another guy. He has been capable in the past of 20 to 25 goals. So guys that can get you 30 on the first line and guys that should get you 20 on the second. Pretty consistently. How about for the Winnipeg Jets? Winnipeg Jets, they had Kyle Connor, Mark Scheifele, and Gabe Vilardi, 41, 39, 27 as far as goals go for them. Second line was Cole Perfetti and a couple of new additions, Jonathan Taves and Gustav Nyquist. They did have Nikolai Ehlers previously. And, Cole Perfetti, 18 goals. Jonathan Taves, throughout the course of his Chicago career, was about a 15, 20 goal scorer as a center. But I don't think you can count on that for a guy who's been out of hockey for 2 years. I don't know if you can count on him to just come back and immediately do that. And Gustav Nyquist has been a guy who is capable of getting you to 20, but it's a rare occurrence. So for them, for Winnipeg, very stacked line one. Line two is a question mark. That's big shoes to fill, losing Nikolai Ehlers. And Jonathan Taves and Gustav Nyquist are going to have to do that. My guess is that Nyquist slots in on the third line or lower. But for Winnipeg, players that can get you 30 on the top line and players that are capable of around 20 on the second. So let's look at the Minnesota Wild's lineup right now. Kaprizov, Eriksson, Zuccarello. Kirill Kaprizov is a perennial 40 goal scorer, so check that box. Joel Eriksson got to 30 goals 2 years ago. This past year, he got 14 goals, but he played 41 games. So 14 goals in 41 games. It's 28 and 82. So right on a 30-goal pace. Matt Zuccarello had 19 goals. Now, if you switch Matt Boldy and Matt Zuccarello, there's your top line check mark with guys that are capable of getting you 30. I think the better number, though, for Joel Eriksson is about 25. Then your second line features Matt Zuccarello, Marco Rossi, and Vladimir Tarasenko. Zuccarello, on a good year, can get to 20. Marco Rossi is a pretty safe bet for at least 20 goals. Vladimir Tarasenko is the wild card here. If he can return to form, and I think playing with more offensively inclined players should help. If he can get you to 20 on the second line, that's where that lineup depth comes in. And then all of a sudden, if that second line is humming, as much as we would like to see Liam Ogren, Danila Yurov, and Ryan Hartman, and those two especially, as much as we'd like to see them play higher in the lineup, they don't need to, because the players in front of them are performing. And really the only way you're pulling anybody out of that top six is if Vladimir Tarasenko just does not work out at all. And if he doesn't, Danila Yurov probably gets the first crack. Liam Ogren probably gets a crack at it. But if those two lines are working, then that's where the lineup depth comes in. So in theory, the offense should be better this year. In theory. Because again, I think it comes down to who you are replacing at key spots in the lineup. If Tarasenko doesn't work out, maybe that's a spot that Danila Yurov grabs and runs with it. We can't really answer that one definitively until we see the season play out, but the lineup has the potential to be much deeper if everybody's healthy than it was previously. Now, the one area that you just never really can plan for, it wouldn't be right to go the entire offseason without talking about the special teams. So we'll take a look at whether or not the special teams have improved. Can you even account for that? We'll talk about that to finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. And once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, hit that like and that subscribe button so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. Reminder, we'll have Kevin Gorg for you coming up tomorrow. And Sunday at noon, our latest live show with Denny will be taking a look at some of the news around the NHL, as well as more Minnesota Wild discussion. Sunday at noon right here on YouTube. That's the one that everybody tunes into every single week. So make sure to join the fun Sunday at noon. Let's talk special teams. I'd be remiss if we didn't bring that up at least once here, getting back into the swing of things for the season. Is the special teams in position to be better in 2025, 2026? One of these years, I think we're going to figure it out as far as the penalty kill goes. It's now been multiple coaches, multiple regimes, multiple penalty kill coaches, and the results are still pretty bad. Face-offs have been a major point of contention. Shots in front, and just doing about 90% of what you need to do, but getting beat in the remaining 10% quite often. Clearing the puck, getting to the puck along the boards before the other team does, blocking a shot, getting caught in no man's land. These are all no's as far as a penalty kill goes. One of the big areas that Nico Sturm was brought in to assist with not only is face-offs, but also is the penalty kill. And Sturm did have, amongst forwards for the Florida Panthers last year, he did have the third highest average time on ice per game with 1 minute 45 seconds per game of penalty kill time. He was third amongst Eetu Luosterainen and Anton Lindell amongst forwards. But if you look at it too, this is just, it's interesting. Face-off percentage while shorthanded. Sturm won face-offs at a 29.7% clip with the Panthers on the penalty kill. And previously, he'd been in the 50s as far as that goes. But I did pick up a nugget from Russo that I think leaves me optimistic about face-offs. Some of you are going to roll your eyes at this, but bear with me. Russo was talking in the latest Worst Seats in the House about how Nico Sturm is one of those face-off film junkies. And the reason that he has become so good at face-offs is because he studies. He studies tendencies not only of the players that he's going up against, but the officials, even as far as how they drop the puck during face-offs. So we're talking about major film breakdowns on face-offs. And Russo went so far as to suggest that, you know, he wasn't sure at what level this was being done by Minnesota Wild players. And if that's the case, Nico Sturm, the first thing that he needs to do when he gets into town is get Joel Eriksson Ek in a room, get Marco Rossi in a room, and say, we're gonna rethink our face-off strategy. There just is no reason that a guy like Joel Eriksson Ek, who is just lauded for his bulldog mentality, there's just no reason that he should be a mid-40s face-off guy. And I think maybe a little different approach will help. And somebody who is a student of the art of the face-off. And if you can get that ingrained in a player like Joel Eriksson Ek and bump his numbers up into the 50s, then all of a sudden you start winning some face-offs shorthanded. And you get the puck cleared. And you end up being able to get your penalty kill set up. Get yourself in position to where you're not having to consistently play behind the eight ball. I'm not saying that it's going to make a huge difference, but I'm willing to at least, just out of pure desperation, I'm willing to at least hear it out. Daily Faceoff has Joel Eriksson Ek, Marcus Foligno, Jake Middleton, Brock Faber as penalty kill unit number 1. Nico Sturm, Yakov Trenyan, Zach Bogosian, and Jared Spurgeon as penalty kill unit number 2. I think some of that, obviously some of that is fill-in until Brodin is ready to return. But Eriksson Ek, Foligno, and Sturm is your top 3 penalty killers. I think it's about the best you can do. And I know Matt Boldy got some time in that area last year. Maybe he gets more. I think for the Wild this year, you have to find a way to get it right. I don't care what you do. I don't care who plays and who doesn't. You got to find a way to get that unit right. You can't go multiple seasons and have that unit be as bad as it's been for as long as it's been bad. I mean, we're talking entire seasons at this point. If we go back to October of 2021 to right now, the Minnesota Wilds are 28th in the league in penalty kill. And that's a 328 game span. From October 1st, 2021 to the end of this regular season, the Minnesota Wild have a 76.5% penalty kill, which is good for 28th in the league. You've got to find a way to just get it consistent. Like, it doesn't have to be 99%. Get it consistent. Get it in the mid-80s and get it consistent. The teams that had the best penalty kill this year, none of them, like, the best penalty kill this year was 83.6. And some of this is, I think we just need to acknowledge how good these power play units are these days. But just get it into the mid 80s, into the upper 80s, into the low 80s. And then we don't have to keep talking about it. And as far as the power play goes, Minnesota Wild this season were 20th at 20.9%. If you go back to the 2021 season, which is kind of when this whole thing started, the Minnesota Wilds in that span are 16th at 21.4%. Let's shoot that puck. I think having some better options on the second unit this year will help, but the guys that are on the top unit are going to be your top unit guys. So they just at some point, you just got to get it done. And maybe having Zeev Boyan be the one that leads that unit will lead to better overall success going forward. But Kirill's not coming off the top unit. Matt Boldy's not coming off the top unit. Joel Eriksson Ek's not coming off the top unit. Those guys just need to figure out a way to get it done consistently and avoid some of those 0 for 40 stretches or 1 for 40 that routinely plague them. Consistency is going to be the key. I can't really say one way or the other if the power play has improved at all. But I think what the Minnesota Wild are banking on this season, and there is still plenty of offseason left. So I'm taking what we have seen so far and just kind of glancing ahead. If the Wilds can stay healthy and can get just some additional contributions from a few pieces in this lineup, they should be better. But you know what happens when we assume and we don't have backup plans and we just go in saying, well, yeah, this is exactly how this is going to work, usually that leads to not what you're hoping for. So a backup plan, a second backup plan, a third backup plan, never a bad thing. And I think that's going to be one of the fun parts of this season is seeing where some of these players slot in to the lineup, and players who elevate, players who get bumped. It's going to be a battle all season, but that is going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, we thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. Again, make sure to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes throughout the week. We've got them for you every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.